Day 2. Getting ready to leave Pixie Camp.
Alright, we're advancing from the south to the north. South of us is obviously the Goldie River, Imita Camp where we stayed last night. This is Imita Ridge. Where we're standing right now is Imita Gap. We've got high ground to my right now, or sitting next to our position here. We spoke yesterday about vital ground and key terrain. So the track itself is vital ground. We need to keep, I guess, ownership of the track. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Features like that, if the enemy get on top of that, that's
yeah, a problem we face.
vital ground,
Yeah.
key terrain. All right, so the idea is to stop the enemy getting up there. All right. Further to our north, there's another ridge line about 2 kilometres in front of us. That's this ridge line here. This is Iori Ridge. All right. These little markers here indicate the Japanese position on Iori Ridge. This one here is Imita Ridge. That little lump there on that branch is the high ground, just to our east. Everyone happy with that? Mm-hmm. The brown one is the trail that we're walking along. The little blue ones are Australian positions. We'll talk about those in a minute. Everyone comfortable with that? Mm-hmm. Right. We'll go back to the start of the whole campaign. So the Japanese landed on the 21st of July 42, sorry. It's been a long night. 1942. They then started making their way south. We had a few skirmishes around Wairopi, the battles of Kokoda. I'm not going to go into any of those in any great detail. It's just to get you to the chronological order of back to where we are now. So as we go forward, those other locations, I'll talk about 2 aspects of the campaign. One is the Australian withdrawal, so what happened in the withdrawal, and what happened in the Australian advance. All right, so some of those will have significant stories, but there'll be 2 stories. One in the withdrawal, one in the advance, yeah? I'm sorry, I don't mean to give the bird anyone. Does that all make sense? All right, this was the Australian rear position. All right, they got told, once they're on Imita Ridge, there is no further withdrawal. You will stay and you will die there if you need to. All right, this is our last line of defence because between here and Port Moresby, there is no further ridge line. This is a natural barrier. All right, if we're on the high ground like this, and we've got defensive positions dug in, so weapon pits dug in, automatic weapons dug in, our indirect fire assets, so the mortars that we own, are down the hill behind us, firing over the hill onto any advancing Japanese force down in the low ground in front of us. Yeah? So we've set this up as a defensive position. This one down the back is 14 Field Regiment, the 225 pounders that we spoke about when we were down at Owers Corner. They brought them down in order to get them in range to fire on Iori Biwa. So we've got Australian defensive positions across here. They're firing over our heads to hit Japanese positions further forward. Yeah. So the way the defensive position was set up, 3rd Infantry Battalion, so that's a militia unit, so Army Reserves in the modern context, Army Reserves. They were on the eastern flank, further out there, around the front of that escarpment, a fair way out there. This unit here is the 2nd 25th Infantry Battalion. 3 companies were in there. There's another company forward, B Company of the 2nd 25th were forward, with 2 platoons out of that company further forward again as standing patrols. The job that they were doing was standing patrols out there. They were the early warning. All right, we're starting to see Japanese starting to advance down the trail. these standing patrols would notice the enemy movement and start withdrawing back, but to start sending runners back or communicate back to the brigade commander, they're starting their advance. All right, so that's part of the early warning system the Australians set up. There was other patrols operating down through here, as in aggressive patrolling, looking for the Japanese and trying to work out what they were seeking to do, how they were going to attack the feature that we're calling Imita Ridge. 2nd 31st Battalion was on our western flank, so out that way, on the high ground, but mainly around the front of it. If you try to defend a position and you position yourself off the back of the position, you've pretty much given the high ground to the enemy. Does that make sense? Yeah. Everyone happy with that? All right, so Australians were set up here, waiting for the Japanese to do that final push. The Japanese were over here. That by the time they got there, they were exhausted. Their lines of communication, when you think of Kokoda and the northern beaches are way back here, they had carriers, but they didn't have the Fuzzy Wuzzy Angels, the predecessors of these guys that are helping us. They didn't have as many of them helping them get their supplies forward. In the military context, that culminated. They got to that point around about the same time, or a little bit earlier in the campaign, way off over in the Pacific. The US 1st Marine Division invaded Guadalcanal in early August. So the Japanese commanders, that took them by surprise. All of a sudden they're on two fronts, or three fronts. You have Milne Bay, they've got the Kokoda initiative, or the Kokoda campaign going, and they've got this significant force element that's now US that have landed in Guadalcanal. Where do we put our assets? Where do we put our scant resources, and what's the most bang for buck that we're going to get? So some of the troops that were actually identified to come into Kokoda and push forward and relieve these Japanese units were then force assigned to go into the Solomon Islands. All right, does that make sense? Everyone happy with that? Has anyone got any questions?
So with the Japs, they were able to hit this position from where they were with artillery?
They had indirect fire support, so artillery pieces.
So they could be hitting,
Yep.
So that's the big,
Wow.
Yeah, so that's the big problem. Is that this is too close to that.
Yep.
Yeah, and they had that first.
So most of the campaign, the Australians never had the ability to reach out. A mortar won't reach that far. A mortar won't go 2 kilometres. You know, you're looking at perhaps 600 metres, depending on whether you got enough. The tree canopy influences.
They didn't have plane support?
Sorry?
Plane support? Like...
We did have aviation support, but again, how does a plane pick a target down in there without dropping napalm like they were doing in Vietnam? Yeah. So further over, there was actually US platforms and RAF platforms dropping ordnance on Japanese forces around Kagi and Abogi before the Battle of Brigade Hill. There was Australian airdrops happening at Minari, so DC-3s or C-47s coming in and dropping supplies to the troops on the ground. So aviation played a role in the battle, but because of the nature of the terrain, the pilots couldn't see what was happening on the ground. Communication between the ground and the pilots, very, very hard because of the way the communications were in 1942. We think of a radio these days, you can pretty much pick up a radio and you can talk anywhere. Not so much in 1942. So how do you control it? How do you tell the pilots where the targets are on the ground? Because if they see a plane coming in, they're likely to get up and move. Because if they've got a significant target there, well, they don't want that target to be identified by the Japanese, because if they lose it, then they don't have that asset anymore. Does that all make sense?
Is 14th indirect fire support, how far down Owens Point does they bring that? Like, do they cross Gold